Are you counting down the days until retirement, realizing you have 30 years to go? Do you feel like you're wasting your life away in meetings that don't matter, working on things you are not truly passionate about, wondering when you will have permission to be the parent that you want to be? If you feel this way, you are not alone. In 2026, 70% of Australians report they have officially reached burnout, and 91% of parents feel guilt about not spending enough quality time with their kids. We've been told our whole life that we have to wait until this magical number of about 65 to retire. Then is when we can finally take a break and rest. But the sobering reality is that 1 in 10 men in Australia will never even make it to that age. My name's Christina Spark. Welcome to the My Family Strategist podcast. I'm a former chartered accountant and corporate strategist, and I love talking about smart financial strategy for busy parents. And at the ripe old age of 39, I've hit my own micro-retirement, which is why in this episode, I am going to break down exactly what a micro-retirement is and the FIRE movement, which is all about financial independence and retiring early. I'm also going to cover the 4% rule, which is the simple math that tells you at what point you can retire. We'll discuss lifestyle adjustments that can make a micro-retirement possible, some of my personal takeaways and the best advice and learnings that I have through my own micro-retirement. We'll chat through some really helpful AI tools that are making this so much easier and accessible. And we will certainly cover how to start planning for your own micro-retirement, even if you are starting from scratch. So let's go into an important disclaimer and then start the show. I'm a former chartered accountant and a strategist, but I'm not your financial advisor. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Finance is personal, so please do your own research or speak to a licensed professional before making any big moves with your money. So let's talk about where this concept of retirement at 65 even came from. Did you know it was invented in 1889 by a German chancellor named Otto von Bismarck? He did it purely for political gain. It was essentially just to bribe the working class away from a socialist revolution. He set this retirement benefit at the age of 70, knowing that the life expectancy at that time in 1889 was only 40 years old. So it would effectively cost the government nothing. So why on earth are we using this dude's concept of retirement today in 2026? It makes absolutely no sense. And that's why I love that there is this FIRE movement, that there are all these new terms, Coast FIRE, Barista FIRE, micro-retirement, mini-retirement, that people are talking about. And although they're all a little bit nuanced and different, it's the same concept. We need to challenge some of these ideas that no longer serve us or work for us in this totally different modern world that we live in. So what is this whole FIRE thing? It's an acronym that stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And the idea behind it is that you aggressively save and lead a fairly minimalist lifestyle early on so that you can retire decades earlier than what most people do, usually around 40 to 50. The whole goal is to live off your investment income. So you work super hard, you don't spend a lot of money, you invest that, and then you reap the benefits of compound interest over time. So there are different variations of FIRE. Traditional FIRE is about being super minimalist and saving typically between 50 to 70% of your income so that you can achieve this milestone. There are gentler approaches like Barista FIRE, which means you leave full-time work, but you continue working part-time, mainly for healthcare benefits, to continue supplementing your investment income. So it's less of an all or nothing. Well, I think if you're able to achieve this and it works for you, that's phenomenal. But if you're a parent right now, especially if you have young children, it's just not the time in your life that you can be aggressively throwing yourself into career and aggressively saving 50 to 70% of your income. That's pretty much a contradiction to the life of a parent because kids are incredibly expensive and they come with so much stuff. That's why I love the concept of a micro-retirement. A micro-retirement says that you don't have to wait until the end of your life to finally get a break and recharge and focus on your passion projects or your family or your health. You can actually take a break whenever you want to. Most people do this every 5 to 10 years. They might take off only a couple months up to a couple years. And the idea is to fully step away from work. Unlike something like a sabbatical, you typically quit your job or do a really big career pivot and step away from that career and perhaps launch yourself into a new fulfilling one. But all these terms aside, I think you can define retirement however the hell you want to. My own definition of retirement is choosing to work because I want to, not because I have the financial pressure to do so. To me, it's about finding those passion projects and those things in life that give me fulfillment while I'm also able to prioritize the things that are most important to me, which is my relationships with my husband, my son, my friends, as well as my health. It's complete freedom to do what I want and what I love and not have financial handcuffs on me. I can work for myself, even if I generate very little income. To me, that's the definition of retirement. I often talk about the 15-year sprint because for many corporate professionals, this is the point at which you hit diminishing returns. And it was certainly true for myself, but there's actually data to back this up, which shows between years roughly 12 to 18 is when most corporate professionals hit the point of diminishing returns. If you were to picture your career on a line graph, the first 7 years would look like a rocket ship. You are accelerating so quickly, frequent promotions, the learning curve is so steep. Every $10,000 increase in your pay feels absolutely life-changing. The next 7 years, from roughly years 8 to 14, you are earning a higher amount of income, but those promotions are further apart. And the raises have a much smaller impact on your lifestyle, which would have risen alongside your income. And so at year 15 plus, this is what's known as the high performers paradox, where you're working even harder to stay in the same place. Doubling your salary at this point is almost completely out of reach. Unlike when you're at the beginning stages of your career, doubling your salary was actually possible. Now, to get that next promotion is much harder because most corporations are shaped like a triangle. The further up you go, the less roles there actually are. The competition is much higher as you have more people competing for a smaller amount of jobs. And also, the amount of incremental pay is now a much smaller fraction when it comes to your lifestyle. And what I call the stress to paycheck ratio now becomes slightly skewed. There is actually 2026 research that shows that there is a point at which an extra $10,000 no longer has any incremental impact on your daily happiness. However, it still requires a 10% increase in your mental load and on-call time. At this stage, you have a lot more pressure and responsibility, yet your salary is not really keeping up with that. And so the point of diminishing returns is the point at which the cost of that next promotion in terms of your time away from your family and your kids, your health, as at this stage you're in your late 30s to say 50s, now is the point where the cost of that next promotion may not be as worth it. And if you are listening to this and you've had a 20-year-long career and you don't feel like you have as much to show for it because your lifestyle kept increasing in line with your income, which is known as lifestyle inflation, please do not panic. The strategy is the same here. Stop the bleeding. Every year that you overspend your income, it's another 2 years to that mandatory working life. It's never too late to start thinking about your point of diminishing returns and your exit path. I did a whole episode on why I quit my corporate job and I walked away from a compensation package of well over $500,000 a year because I wasn't fulfilled and because I wasn't being the parent that I wanted to be. I just realized one day, this is not the life that I want. When people are on their deathbed, they are not wishing that they had worked longer and harder. They are not wishing that they had spent less time with their children. It's the exact opposite. There is a book by Bonnie Ware that I talk about in that episode where people share their top life regrets literally on their deathbed, and not spending enough quality time with their young kids always ranks number one, as well as not wishing they hadn't worked so hard. All right, let's dig into the numbers. You cannot access your superannuation before the age of 60 if you retire. So you need to bridge that gap if you want to retire or take a micro retirement when you're in your 30s or your 40s. The key to all of this lies in the 4% rule, which essentially says that if you can live off 4% of your liquid assets, you can retire. 4% is known as the safe withdrawal rate. So let's say you are investing in the share market In a perfect world, the market would earn 10% every single year, but we know that markets are volatile and go up and down. So the goal is to give you a number that is so safe that even if the market were to collapse the day of your retirement, statistically speaking, you would still be able to recover from that and live off that for the next 30 years. This approach was validated by the Trinity study in 1998, and it looked at 30 years of market data and ensured that this 4% rule was a safe enough cushion that it would survive all of the market upsides and downsides. They used 75 years of stock and bond market data to figure out that even in some of the worst financial crises that we've experienced, including the Great Depression, that 4% withdrawal rate holds, meaning you can still dip into that principal, but over a long period of time, your portfolio is statistically likely to recover and last at least 30 years. And in fact, when they've done research on this, people who follow the 4% rule typically have more money than they thought they would because it is so conservative. And now we have the benefit of AI to run even more financial scenarios to figure out if this is going to work for you. And I'll get to that a little bit later in the episode. The other side of the same coin of the 4% rule is the 25x freedom number. All you need to do is take your annual expenses and multiply it by 25. That is how much money you need to have to retire. So the other thing you want to do is figure out your expenses. The easiest way to do that is download your credit card statements over the last year or so, upload them into your AI tool of choice, and ask them to tell you what is your average monthly expenses. Make sure you're feeding that from all of your cash outgoings. So it could be credit cards or multiple different bank accounts. Download all those statements, upload it into Google Gemini. This will take you 5 minutes to figure out on average, how much are you spending? Most people have no idea how much they're spending, so it is an empowering number to know. I would say at this point to conservatively mark up your expenses. So let's say you find you're spending $5,000 per month on average. I would probably mark that up by 20%. So that $5,000 is now $6,000. And the reason is just to be conservative, because there is this effect that when you are working, you are not spending money. If you stop working, every day is now Saturday, and you are going to be spending a lot more money on the little things, eating out, going to cafes, different activities. So mark it up by 20% just to be conservative. And now I want you to go ahead and figure out your asset position. This is your liquid assets. These are things that you can easily sell if you need to retire. Now, primarily what you're going to include in your liquid assets is any stocks or ETFs, investment bonds, your offset account, your savings account, any cash or cash equivalents that you can fairly easily access. That is what you're going to include in this number. If you're a homeowner and you own your primary residence, you are not going to include that in this number. You are not going to include your primary home because you cannot sell 4% of that every year to fund your lifestyle. It doesn't work that way. When it comes to investment property, you can handle it a couple different ways. You can't withdraw 4% of an investment property. So you could either look at a scenario where you sell your investment property and then use that cash to fund your lifestyle or to probably reinvest in the stock market so that you can access it more freely. Or you could just see if you can survive with the investment income that it generates. Assuming you're cash flow positive and you're not negatively gearing, that is a great way to factor in your investment income into the equation. So to recap, if you have no idea how much you actually have in liquid assets and you don't know how much you're spending per month, figure out those two numbers first. And I dedicated a whole episode on tracking your family's net worth and how to come up with your own financial scorecard that aims at figuring those two numbers out really quickly and easily and tracking that over time. Awareness and knowledge about that is the first and foremost priority. Once you have those two numbers, now it's exciting and you can play with retirement. Figuring out 4% of your liquid assets and then figuring how much your expenses are is going to unlock when you can retire or when you can take a micro retirement. So what if you were starting from scratch and you have very little savings, but you do not want to wait until you are 65 to take some type of a career break? First, figure out what is your definition of retirement. Is it that you will stop working entirely? Because that is a much more difficult bar to achieve young. Or is it that you will walk away from a job that no longer serves you and is destroying your mental health, and you will find something you are passionate and that you love, even if it pays you half of what you were earning before? That's a much more achievable scenario, and one that I would argue leads to a much richer life. So let's say you run through the numbers and you figure out you need $60,000 a year to live, multiply it by 25. That means you would need $1.5 million in order to retire today. But again, if it's a mini retirement or a micro retirement, and your intention is to continue working, but in a part-time capacity or doing a passion project, and you're still going to generate some income, make sure that you factor that in. It then reduces your freedom number significantly. Let's say you find a job that you absolutely love, working part-time, that pays you $40,000 gross, and your take-home pay after tax would be about $36,000. That means you can reduce that from the $60,000. So $60,000 minus the $36,000 passion job that you found, that means your remaining gap to cover is $24,000 per year. $24,000 per year multiplied by 25 is $587,000 in terms of your freedom number. How much more achievable is $587K versus $1.5 million? So this is how you can play with it. It's a beautiful balance of figuring out, what am I most passionate about? What is going to pay me a little bit of money? What's my passion accelerator to help me achieve my retirement goals? Don't focus on the freedom number. That number is too big and too scary. Instead, focus on the gap number. Figure out your monthly expenses and figure out how much income is actually required to sustain that. If this is important to you, if you are desperate to take a micro retirement, career break, career pivot, and in your current lifestyle does not allow that, what are you willing to change? What do you value? Housing is going to be your biggest expense. Would you be willing to geographically relocate for this goal? That is probably going to be the biggest savings that you can actually find. If you are not needing to be close to a city center and you have the flexibility to work virtually or from home, perhaps you don't need to be paying the expensive premium of living in a really busy, expensive city. Is it possible for you to downgrade housing and actually geographically relocate? Living somewhere with a low cost of living because you don't have to commute anymore can be a huge savings. If you are one of the lucky people that is sitting in Sydney or Melbourne or in a big city in an expensive $2.5+ million home right now, which, let's face it, a lot of Australian families are, then you are essentially living in your retirement. And this is where geographic arbitrage can be used to your advantage. If you choose to sell that home and live in a beautiful $1.5 million home in the Gold Coast or in a high growth regional area for $1.5 million, you've just unlocked $1 million of tax-free cash because you do get a tax exemption on your primary home. If you were to withdraw 4% of that $1 million, that's $40,000 per year in passive income by just making that one change in your lifestyle. Another big saving could be downgrading to one car if you currently own two cars. In Sydney, it typically costs between $10,000 to $15,000 per year just to have a second car. That could equate to $300,000 by the time that you retire, just by downgrading to a single car. If you are doing a different career path and you don't need to commute to work every day and you can survive off a single car, huge lifestyle savings. Also, childcare. If you have young kids under 5 and you are paying expensive fees in childcare, guess what? When your income goes to zero, your subsidy could go all the way up to 90% coverage. Or you might need less childcare overall because you're deciding you want to take a career break to spend more time with your child. With the 3-day guarantee that just started in January of 2026, this is a huge positive change for the case of retirement because even with $0 income, you are guaranteed 72 hours of subsidized childcare. Another enormous expense is private school, and I dedicated an entire episode on this topic, which I will link below, that answered the question, is private school worth it? And it showed that children who go to private school have no difference in life outcomes to children who attend public school. But the math does not lie. If you are sending 2 kids to a private school costing $40,000 per year on average after tax, that is going to cost you $1 million. So that's another $1 million in equity that you are going to need to have in your retirement fund. If you choose not to go to private school, you could potentially be moving your retirement forward between 7 to 10 years. And I know moving kids from private school, if they already attend, seems really difficult. And I don't want to underestimate how challenging that could be. But what's also true is that children are incredibly resilient. A lot of the research I found while doing that episode is how it actually better prepares children by going to public school for the reality of real world. And they perform better at university than kids who attend private school. I think this all again comes down to what you value and what your family values. Is it a prestigious school, or is it more time with a fully present parent that's not on the verge of burnout and perhaps dealing with poor mental health? There's also fantastic options and middle grounds. For example, small independent private schools and Catholic schools that come with a much, much smaller price tag, but are still really high quality education if you do live in an area without a good public school. So I would encourage you to check out that episode for more on this topic. There's also so many things that you pay for to save you time. Uber Eats, eating out, delivery and subscription services, a housekeeper, cleaners, all of these things, if you had a little bit more time, you could likely reduce your expense in those categories. Also, I know for our family, we were constantly looking forward to that next holiday, that next big international trip, just as a mental reset and a way to survive with our busy and demanding life. And what I have found since my own micro retirement is that I do not crave those big expensive holidays nearly as much because I feel so fulfilled and happy in my normal day-to-day life now. I am not on the constant brink of burnout anymore where I need those intentional breaks quite as often. And again, this is about figuring out what you value. If you really value an expensive lifestyle of international travel and dining and eating out, well, then maybe you need to figure out, do you value that more than time with your family or doing a career that you're more passionate about? And this is where it's a balancing act and it requires a lot of self-reflection to figure out what is the most important thing for you and where are you willing to make sacrifices for this overall dream or goal of retiring early. So a few of my learnings and tips from doing this is remember that when you don't earn any income, your taxes drastically decrease. So this is the time when you're not earning income to sell assets, to take big capital gains, because your tax rate is going to fall drastically. So this is a strategy. Wait until you have a financial year with little to no income, and that is the year in which you want to sell assets. Like I said earlier, if you have an investment property and you realize I actually need to sell that property and then reinvest that into an ETF so that I can withdraw at 4%, that's the time that you want to do it, is actually after. So do not make those big sales while you're still in a top tax bracket. Wait until you have retired or micro-retired. Also, keep in mind, if childcare is a big expense, all of this impacts your subsidy. Because remember, your childcare subsidy is based on your adjusted taxable income. So it includes absolutely everything, which is employment income going down and perhaps recognizing big capital gains. So you'll want to calculate how much your subsidy is based on any of those given years when you are making some financial decisions like selling assets. Now, another question that I had to work through myself was, is it better to just pay off my mortgage in full for my own personal home instead of making those regular monthly repayments and also saving and investing? My personal conclusion was that yes, it is better to just pay off your home loan. And that is because you do not want to have these big monthly repayments. You'll also be saving a lot of money in interest. For us, paying off our home in 5 years versus 30 years is the difference of $1.4 million in interest that I will then save. And this is more about reducing your risk when you are retired. If you pay off your whole mortgage and the market crashes or interest rates go way, way up, you will be fine. You will not be impacted by those things. Whereas if you continue with your mortgage and you do experience big interest rate upswings or a big market collapse, that's where you can really get into trouble. So it's mainly to reduce your risk. So many of the strategies that I share on this podcast are about tax strategies in order to minimize taxes paid. But the strategy is really different if you earn no income, because you won't have any tax to pay. So if you are negatively gearing, which means that you have an investment property and that you're actually making a loss, the revenue you collect from that property is less than your expenses to upkeep it, that is no longer helpful if you have no income because you have nothing to deduct it against. But keep in mind, we're talking about a micro retirement, which means that the intention is in some stage to work again and to generate income. So eventually you should be able to use those losses. You can still save those deductions, but you might find that you are no longer able to sustain a property that is losing money. So it makes more sense to then just sell the properties and take the gain and stop the bleeding of negatively gearing, because it's no longer serving its original benefit, which was to reduce taxable income. There's also some great AI tools for planning. I did all of my retirement planning using Google Gemini, which is my AI tool of choice. You can model out so many different scenarios too. Here's a tip. Ask Gemini for the Monte Carlo simulation. What that is 1,000 different scenarios that tests your financial plan against to ensure that it still wins out every time. It looks at the probability of success. So in my own scenario that I ran, I found that I would be successful 94% of the time. The 6% of the time that my retirement would not work out would be a result of a major market crash within the next 3 years. So this can also give you a little bit more validation on your success. Thanks so much for sticking with me. I hope I have given you some food for thought, if nothing else. Some ways that you can play around with your finances to figure out where your values and your financial goals can come together. If you haven't yet checked out my episode on how to track your family's net worth, which goes through really simple exercises on how to figure out how much you are bringing in every month, how much your expenses are, as well as your asset position and your total debt position, then I would highly recommend checking out that episode. And if you want to hear a little bit more about how I personally came to the decision that I would quit my corporate job and find my own definition of micro retirement, then please check out that episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week.